Today we'll be talking about the GDC submission demonstration. And if you've been following these webinars, back in November there was a webinar about the more administrative and conceptual aspects of GDC submission. This one's going to be mostly technical and a demonstration. So if you want to know some more of the administrative and conceptual stuff, feel free to watch the November webinar, which should be available on YouTube very soon. For those of you just joining us, please type your questions into the chat box and stay muted, please. So our webinar agenda is going to involve a small overview, and the meat of the webinar is going to be demonstrations. So the first demonstration is going to be about uploading clinical and biospecimen and metadata. The second one will be on uploading genomic data files. And the third one will be resolving the QC report errors. And I'll answer questions at the end. So here's the GDC upload and validation process that goes from when you first have your project ready and you need to review the GDC dictionary, all the way to the bottom in which the GDC releases data to the data portal. Now, this first demo is going to cover when you first review the GDC dictionary and data model and follow through to when you'll be uploading clinical and biospecimen data to the GDC, so actual data. So let's actually go to the demo here. And here is the GDC data model. Now, this is the first thing to consult when one needs to submit some data to the GDC. This outlines which types of entities can be related to each other, which ones are required for entities to be submitted. So I know this is very small and pretty hard to see, but here we have, the case at the center with a bunch of clinical data around in the purple, and then down with the gray ones you get the biospecimen nodes, and finally some nodes that can be submitted as actual files. And when I say node, that means entity. Those are used interchangeably, but I will be saying entity mostly. So like I said before, I know this is hard to see, so I've kind of made this blown up version of the data model here. This is just a small portion of it. First, we have the case, which is the GDC's name for a patient or a subject, a sample, which is a biological specimen that came from a patient or a case, and an aliquot, which is the DNA or RNA that is extracted from the sample. So let's first talk about how one would get started. So let's say I'm at the beginning of my project. Right now, I need to upload a case. So I would go to my data dictionary here and click on Viewer. And each of those entities that were referenced in the previous page that I showed you on the data model are represented here, and they can be clicked on. Now, each of these will give the fields and the allowed values for each field as a list of properties. So with the case, you can see that disease type, index data, loss to follow-up have the following enumerations or allowed values. And as you can see, sometimes there are a lot. Now, one question I get a lot is, how do I know that my value is there? How do I know how do I know how to find this? I mean, I knew a priori how to get to this, but your average user might not. And for this, what I have is the data dictionary search tool, which was developed by a third party. And let's say I knew that my patients had a disease, but I didn't know how exactly the GDC wants to accept that. So I would type something like disease into the field here, and as you can see, there are a couple of automatically completed things. So let's just leave it at that and hit search. Now I want to see which properties can take the disease information. So I'll click on that, and I look, and this one makes the most sense. Disease type is associated with a case, and it's used to describe the type of malignant disease. So I would know that that's the value that I want. And one might even want to say, okay, I want to say the patient has a sarcoma. So this can be chosen. And there are no properties that are specific to sarcomas, but there's a lot of values in various properties. Like, for example, a disease type might have a sarcoma value, or a primary diagnosis in a diagnosis entity might also have this. So that's kind of how one might navigate this. So let's go back to a more interesting entity type, which would be the sample. Now, I scroll down here and I see this column here has a required question mark. And this will tell us what we need to provide if we were to submit a given entity. So in this case, if you wanted to submit a sample, you would need to upload a sample type and a tissue type in your nodes fields. Now, let's actually jump in here and look at the submission system. So this is the dashboard here. I'm going to refresh it real quick to make sure I'm all logged in. Everything in here is behind a login and requires dbGaP access to reach. Now, the GDC internal project, this is one that we simply use for testing. Here are a bunch of graphs that they give various information, which I think is described in the November webinar, but it's to help the submitter know how complete they are with their project based on the information that it has. To actually start uploading things, you would click this upload button here. But before we do that, let's actually look at the data and see what it looks like here. So data is accepted from the GDC in two different formats. There's the JSON format, which is a series of keys and values. And there's the TSV format, which, as you expect, is tab-separated values. So what I'm showing you here is that these two files are the same exact information in two different formats. Yeah, this one just has key value pairs, and the TSV has columns and values. So at the top of this JSON here, we have the three most important things the pieces of information to provide when submitting an entity. There's the type. You want the system to know which type it is. Is it a case, a sample, or an aliquot? In this case, we're uploading the case because we have our project ready and the case needs to be uploaded. So the next line is the submitter ID. The submitter ID is the unique identifier given by the submitter so that the submitter can keep track of it. Once one of these entities is uploaded to the GDC, it receives its own unique identifier that's unique to the GDC system. So the submitter ID is for tracking at the submitter level. And the third field here that's very important is the link. In this case, it's projects. So, like I was showing before, the case requires that a link to the project to be submitted. So this is accomplished by providing a key, and then within that key, the value is a key value pair. So you're saying attach this to a project with the code named internal, which is GDC internal, the project I was showing before. Now the other values were not required, but we added them anyways because it's good to have a primary site and disease type attached to a patient. So let's go ahead and upload that. So first the upload button is clicked, and there's two ways to do this. There's choose files, which is, it goes through your browser, whether it's Windows or Mac. And the other method is to just click and drag, which I'm going to be doing here. So here's that case.json file I was showing you before. And clicking and dragging it in here, we will allow it to validate. Now it takes a few seconds. But it succeeded. So now I have two options. Commit will actually commit this. It will insert it into the GDC database. Discard will remove it completely, and it's like this action never happened. So in our case, because I want to submit associated samples and aliquots, I'm going to click commit. And we're good to go. That case is in the GDC, and I will demonstrate that in a second. Now, the next thing we want to do is submit the sample and the aliquot. So we want to point this sample at the case we just submitted, and then the aliquot will point at the sample we just submitted, that we are about to submit. So I'll show you these here. This is the sample JSON, and this is the aliquot JSON. So I'm going to go ahead and upload the sample.json. I'm going to do it by clicking and dragging. And before I hit validate, I can actually add more files, which I'm going to do here. So I'm going to add the aliquot. So as long as the dependencies are there, as in the sample has a case and the aliquot has a sample, whether they're being submitted at the same time, it doesn't matter. It should work. I'll choose to validate these. And while it's validating, I'll just demonstrate one more thing, and that's I could actually submit this sample and the aliquot at the same time by concatenating these together in a JSON list. So you just add a comma there and put them in. So just how those two files should work, these two together in the same exact JSON file would work the same way. So let's go back to our validation, and this validated correctly. So I'll click commit. And that will insert these into the GDC. So one more thing I'd like to demonstrate is if, let's say, you make a mistake. So the tissue type is normal, but I accidentally, mess up and I add the number 3 at the end. So now this file sample.json is invalid. This normal 3 is not a valid tissue type, just normal would be. So when I go ahead and try to upload, sorry, my mistake, sample.json, and this Sorry, real quick, I forgot to save that, so I'll need to re-upload that. So we're expecting this to fail because I added that extra 3 at the end of that value. And yes, as you can see, it turned red and failed. So now, let's say I didn't do this on purpose, and I want to know, why did this fail? What did I do wrong in my file? So you would click on the ID over here, and a panel would appear, and this would allow you to download an error report. So taking out the error, this one's pretty informative. Normal 3 is not one of, and then it gives you the list of the allowed values. So that's what a failure looks like. Now, when I told you before that I wanted to show you that these items were actually in the GDC, we can do that now. When we go to the case.json, which we submitted before, we can see that this submitter ID is how we're going to find our case. GDC-internal-000006. So here's my list of cases, and here is here's the file, or the case, the specific one that was just uploaded. So there's a section down here. All of the properties are laid out. So the UUID is the assigned unique identifier. The submitter ID is the submitter-given unique identifier. We have more details with the additional properties. And the related entities that I submitted, which were the sample and the aliquot, are also listed here, along with some transaction information. So if I want to look at that sample, it'll bring me to that sample, and I can click on that for additional information. So we submitted the sample, and we submitted the aliquot. So that concludes the first demo, and which moves us to the second portion of the demo, which is uploading an actual data file. So one thing I want to show you now is this is how the data submission portal will look when you first enter it. And you'll see a list of projects down here that you have access to. I have access to a lot of projects for administrative purposes, so I will just type in this URL, which will bring me directly to the GDC internal dashboard. So now this next part involves registering a data file and uploading data using the data transfer tool. And when I say register, what that means is that you don't upload the file directly through the submission portal. What the submitter will do is provide information about the file, which will make the submission portal ready to accept the file. And this information includes MD5 sum, file size, file name, and some data type specific properties. So this demo will involve regroup submission, submitted align read submission. That's the GDC's way of referring to submitted BAM files. And then we're going to do some work with GraphQL and actually do the file upload. So I'll just go to the next slide here. Let's end the show. And I made another blown up diagram for some downstream entities. So right here, we're starting at the aliquot because that's the most downstream entity that we've submitted here. So our next step is going to be uploading these regroups. I'm going to show you what those read groups look like here. We're going to upload 3 of them. So here are the read groups, and in the GDC, a read group refers to a group of reads that originate from one Illumina lane. So usually we don't want more than one lane in one read group, and as you know, sometimes a submitted BAM file might actually include reads from more than one lane from an Illumina run. So here's the information that's required for a read group. This is things involving, platform, the library strategy. If it's whole genome sequencing, usually the target capture kit won't be used. That would be not applicable. If it was whole exome or targeted sequencing, we would require a target capture kit. And here we are submitting 3 of them. And something I want to bring to your attention that I didn't show before is that in the JSON, we have this kind of key value system of connecting the entities. However, in the TSV format, it's Aliquot, so we're attaching the read group to the Aliquot. So we want to tell this, in this type read group, that the aliquot.submitter ID is this. So because we're submitting these 3 read groups to this one aliquot, we will have the same value in each of these 3 lines. So one line is one read group. And these are 3 different read groups given that we have 3 different submitter IDs here. So let's go ahead and submit those read groups. My apologies, I keep accidentally pressing that. So readgroup.tsv, we'll go ahead and upload that. And this will kind of be the foundation of submitting an actual molecular file. So we'll go ahead and commit. Now we're not ready to actually upload the molecular file yet. We have one more entity to go, which is the submitted align reads entity. This will give information about the actual BAM file. So as you can see, here's the file name. We have a file size, an MD5 sum, and then some miscellaneous information about the about this file, which is used in the portal. Like, for example, it's a BAM file, so that'll help with filtering later. One thing I do want to mention here is that before, we were doing 3 read groups and attaching them to one aliquot, the same aliquot. So we just repeated the node connection, or the aliquot connection 3 times. However, now we are at the submitted align reads file, and we need to upload the submitted align reads to be attached to 3 distinct read groups. This is accomplished by giving that same structure, so the parent node, read groups, .submitter ID, but then you have #1, read group 1. My apologies, this should have been #2 and #3. So read group submitter ID 1, 2, and 3 are 3 different values, which aligns with the submitted align read attaching to 3 different read groups. And like I said before, this is because it was likely that 3 Illumina lanes were all included in the same aligned BAM file. So let's upload that. We'll go ahead and validate it. Very quickly, worked. I'll hit commit. And now we have a submitted aligned read file that is registered in the GDC. And by registered, I mean that we're ready to upload the actual file. So first, let's go look at that file. And we would do that by scrolling down this panel here, looking for submitted aligned reads. As you can see, there's 9 of them. And it's this one here, based on the submitter ID. So one of the most important things to pay attention to here is the file state. There is a state, but right now what we're worried about is the file state. This is what tells us the status of the file upload. So has the file been uploaded yet? In this case, no, because we're simply at registered, as in we're ready to upload. So let's go through the steps that can be used to upload the file. So let's go back to the GDC website, to the GDC Data Transfer Tool. This here is just a downloadable command line interface that will allow you to upload actual files to the GDC. So the GDC data portal can't accept actual data files. It can only accept the metadata. The actual data files are uploaded separately. And the reason for this is that data files, when it comes to genomics, can be fairly large, and uploading them through a browser would be very unreliable. So in my case, I'm using OS X, but Windows users and Ubuntu users can also use the data transfer tool. If you use other operating systems like CentOS or Red Hat, there are directions to compile this yourself. So please reach out to the GDC help desk if you have any questions about that. So we have the file ready. The GDC Data Transfer Tool is also referred to as the GDC Client here. This GDC Client is, it comes direct, it doesn't need to be installed, it comes directly out of the zip file in a usable form. And the way we run this, let's clear this, let's run this. So we have /GDC Client. Then the next steps is we want to tell it the function. So sometimes download can be used. This is used to download things from the GDC portal. But in our case, we'll use upload because we are using that directionality. Now, the next thing we need is the unique identifier that was assigned to the submitted aligned read, the UUID. And this is not the same as the submitter ID. So this actually has to be looked up. And I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this that are useful in certain cases. So if you're only looking to do this for 1 or 2 files, you would just go to the submission portal and find this UUID here. So I click on this, and it gives us a UUID. So here it is. But we have another method that can be used for perhaps a larger number of submissions, which is the usual case. Usually people aren't submitting 1 file at a time. So what we have here is this nice interface called Graphical, which is which accesses the GDC submission GraphQL endpoint. And I've typed out, as you can see, it's kind of whining here because it's not happy that these fields are incorrect. I just typed them out as an example. So the type we will replace with the actual type of entity we're searching for, which is the submitted align reads. And as you can see, there's a nice autocomplete there. Submitted align reads. Now we want to filter it down to a set of submitted align reads that fit a certain property. So if you remember, our experimental strategy was WGS, whole genome sequencing. So we'll take a look at those. So experimental strategy is whole genome sequencing. And then the first argument is just telling us how many entries do we want. Do we only want the first one? Do we want the first 100? If we put 0 there, that means everything. And this 0 shouldn't always be used because it can time out if there's way too many. But for just a few entities, this should be okay. Now, these 3 fields here are the fields that we want it to export, to show us in this other panel over here. So we want the ID, which is the UUID. We want the file name, so we know which file we're looking at. And then we're going to hit execute. And something I kind of like here is this prettify button, which allows you to, you could mess this up as much as you want, but it'll make it a nice format. So this is taking a little while. So maybe what we could do is tell us the first 10, and something I forgot to do is give it a project ID. So right now what it's doing is it's finding all of the submitted line reads in the entire GDC, which is not what we want to do. So we're going to filter it down to within project GDC internal. And right here, we can see that this is the BAM file we were uploading. So this is our ID here. And we're going to use this ID to tell the GDC client what to upload. So what it's going to do is it's going to read this ID, it's going to look in the database and say, what should the file name be? And this is what's going to come up. So it's going to try to upload this file here, which is the correct one. There's a couple more things that are required for this upload to occur. The first thing, actually just one more thing, -t token file. Token.txt is just a text file that I have my token in. I had to log in to the GDC submission portal, but in order to pass your credentials to the GDC client, you need to use a text file with token in it. So I'll go ahead and upload this. If you remember, we were originally in file state registered. Okay, so it finished. This happened instantaneously, so you didn't really miss much. And this error message up here is something that is displayed every time just to remind users to secure their token. So this file is finished uploading. And if we go ahead and reload this page, we will see that the file state is now uploaded. Now, the file state is uploaded, and that means, yes, it received a file. However, it might have been the wrong file. You could have had 2 files that are named the same thing, and you gave it the wrong one. So what it's going to do, it runs through and it validates the file against the reported MD5 sum and file size. So it runs an MD5 sum independent of what the submitter submits and says, do these match? If they do match, file state will move to validated. If they don't match, file state will move to error. Let's give it one more reload because this is a very small file and this may have moved to validated. Okay, it didn't do that yet, but this will eventually move to validated. So now we're in GDC internal, and let's say our submission is complete. We're all done submitting. We think we have all of our files and all of the necessary data to harmonize is ready. So what we would do is click Review, and what this does is this locks the Upload button. See, Upload disabled. So this is to let other submitters know, because there might be multiple submitters for a project that we think we're ready to go and we don't want to change anything. This can be undone very easily simply by clicking this Reopen button. So let's just reopen and confirm, and we're ready to upload again. So let's talk about that Request Harmonization button that we saw just a few seconds ago. So we'll go back to Review, and now we see this option here, Request Harmonization. So this is the button that says, we think we're done submitting, and we want you, the GDC, to start harmonizing this data as we've given it to you. So once we click on this, there's a few disclaimers here, but the main one down here is a request to please resolve 8 critical errors and review 13 warnings in your project's QC report. This is the next demo here that we're going to talk about. So now, at this point, we need to verify the accuracy and the completeness of the project data. There are some things that don't get caught by the GDC dictionary that need to be resolved sometimes. So there's a built-in system in the GDC submission portal called the QC Report Dashboard. It provides a list of errors, and these are divided into 2 different categories. The first is critical, and that means we cannot harmonize this data if this error goes unresolved. Warning means, as a submitter, you should really check this out because this is either unusual or it may interfere with release. So, for example, not having clinical data would interfere with release, but the molecular data would be fine to harmonize. On our doc site, we have a list of all of these errors and the suggested resolutions for how this would be fixed. So let's just real quickly go through the QC report. And as you can see, there's 8 critical and 14 warnings. So each of the errors is associated with a type of entity. So in this case, we have an aliquot. And this is a warning that they found multiple submitted aligned reads on the same aliquot, and they're of the same experimental strategy. So most people like to pool their submitted aligned reads together, but some people might not, and that's okay. But we want to remind people to make sure they're not duplicating their data. Let's go down to submitted unaligned read. These are all warnings too, but here's some critical errors. Duplicate MD5s. So what this is telling us is that we have found 2 files that have the exact same MD5, meaning that those 2 files are exactly identical. no two files, with some exceptions, will have the same MD5. So what a user would have to do, or a submitter would have to do, is resolve this issue, figure out why that same file is there. And the GDC Help Desk is always happy to help with this, but a lot of information can be retrieved from this dashboard. So that's it for the QC reports, and that's the end of this demonstration. Here are some useful links for more information. The ones I'd like to point out are the documentation website, which have lots of information about how to use every feature of the GDC, the submission portal to do everything we did today, the GDC data transfer tool, which can be downloaded at this web address, and the support email down here. If you send an email to this, it leads to my team and I, and we are happy to answer any question you have about submission or anything else about the GDC. Thank you very much for listening to this demonstration. I'll take any questions now.
Okay, thanks, Bill. There's just a couple of questions in the Q&A. There was a question of the recordings. Where could they be made available? And I did try to address that in the Q&A. We do make them available if you select a specific webinar. For example, if you go to the webinars page that provided the link in the chat in the Q&A for the bioinformatics webinar, you'll see the video there. It does take some time because we have to create and edit the transcripts that go through our 5-way compliance process. So there is certainly a lag. We're trying to reduce the time, but we'll see it. It just will take some time. The other questions, there was a questions on the example, Bill, that you provided of the 3 FASTQs that had different barcodes combined. Is the example of the 3 FASTQs with different barcodes combined and then aligned to a reference genome? They wanted to know if that was. They wanted to know if is the example of 3 FASTQs with different barcodes combined and then aligned to a reference genome.
So it depends what kind of barcode we're talking about. Typically what we'll want is that the FASTQs are submitted separately as FASTQ files and not as tar files, and not concatenated. So those would usually be uploaded as submitted unaligned reads files. If they can be combined, and the way that you would combine them, and let me go back to my, so the way to combine them would be to submit multiple submitted unaligned reads, the same experimental strategy to the same aliquot. So the alignments are actually performed on an aliquot experimental strategy level. So all of the whole genome samples for aliquot A are all aligned together. All of the RNA-seq FASTQs for aliquot B would all be aligned together.
Okay, thanks, Bill. There was a question on showing if you can go back and show where UUID was retrieved from. When you went and were demonstrating where to retrieve the UUID for the file, can you go back and show that again? Where those?
Right. Yeah. No problem. So so let's start from the beginning of the GDC submission portal here, because I think I might have been well into it, and I'm going to show you from beginning to end. So what you would do is you would know that I submitted a submitted aligned read file. So to get to that, you would click the Browse tab at the top of the page here, and this brings us to a list of all of the entities that were submitted. You would scroll down until you find Submitted Aligned Reads, and you would find your submitter ID. So if you gave this submitter ID, which we did earlier, you would click on that, and here is the UUID kind of a little bit outside of the screen here. We can make that a little nicer. Sometimes if your browser cuts anything off, a good way to retrieve the UUID, a little bit of a hack I know, is you can get it from up here too. Now, if you're talking about the GraphQL way to do it, you would go to this website here. So it's the submission portal website /GraphIQL. So Graphical. It's a different piece of software that does GraphQL queries. And one way you can actually go directly to your file of choice is to query for file name. And presumably you would know the name of the file you are submitting, which we do here. File name is this. So I just copied that. I'm going to paste it right in here. And once you run this query, you will see that this ID is your UUID, the same one retrieved before. And this is retrieved by putting ID as one of the field names in a GraphQL query.
Great, thank you, Bill. Can you talk a little bit about how, like, some organizations submit data in batches, and how the GDC supports submission of batches where you can request harmonization and then re-upload, reopen the project?
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about that. So let's go back to the submission portal here. So this would not be something I'd be able to demonstrate, only because it is it would be a lot of work to do. But let's say, okay, I go through the submission portal and I upload 100 BAMs, right? And I know 300 more are coming 5 months from now, but I kind of want the first 100 to be harmonized as soon as possible. So what I would do is I would submit the first 100, go down, click review, resolve all of my critical errors, request harmonization, and there would actually be a button here that I'd be able to do that with. So now you have those 100 BAMs that are they are in the queue. They are in the GDC's hands at this point, and will be harmonized in the order that they're received, or in the order that they're in the queue. Now that I did that, I can reopen, and it's a few months later, and I got my 300 BAMs. I can submit these now. I upload the 300 BAMs, go through the same process, and I would just hit request harmonization again once all the errors are solved, and that would send the 300 BAMs to the GDC as a second batch.
Thank you, Bill. Can you also discuss how a submitter would access the GDC harmonized data so that they can review it before we release it?
Yes. So once a batch is harmonized by the GDC and is fully integrated into the GDC's database, a manifest is generated for submitters of the harmonized data and is sent to them for approval. And this manifest can be used with the GDC data transfer tool, and once it will allow the submitter to download the harmonized data and then contact us once it's approved for release.
Great. Thank you, Bill. I do not see any other questions or answers from anyone in the chat. So I think at this point, we'll certainly end the webinar. Thanks, Bill, for this overview, and thanks so much to all the participants for attending. We'll try to get the videos out as fast as we can. So I think that, let me just see if there's another question. No, I don't see any other questions. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody for attending. Please attend. Our next one is, I believe, February 24th, and we're going to be going over our clinical data analysis tools. So thanks everybody for attending. We'll catch you all in February. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.